Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Online for Authors. My guest today is Shelley Blanton-Stroud. Her historical novel that we're going to talk about mostly is titled An Unlikely Prospect. Welcome, Shelley.
Thank you so much for having me, Carole. I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
It's my pleasure. I loved learning about the peace riots in San Francisco back in 1945. Tell our audience how they were. How could they have been overlooked?
Right. So for a little bit of context, so on August 14th, 1945, it was VJ Day when the war ended, World War II ended. And as everybody knows, there were celebrations in streets all over the world. And we've seen photographs of American streets, people out there kissing, celebrating, all of that. So far as we know, San Francisco is the only such celebration that turned into a riot. And during the course of that riot, 1,000 people were hospitalized. Anywhere from 9 to 13 people were killed. It's not clear. And at least 6 women were raped that we know of. And, so it was reported in a very limited way, not like aggressively reported. So almost no one knew about it. And when I discovered it in maybe the first couple paragraphs in a history book called San Francisco 1945 to Present. So it kind of began with that, but not very much. And so I thought, wow, I've read so much history and I've never heard that this happened. And also, why didn't he devote more time to it? So when I started doing research through the news records, there was very little to go on at that time period. So one of the things I was interested in, I had a number of questions about it when I started to research. Number one, why was there so little reporting on such a big story?
Right.
And why are there so few records available? And that's kind of what got me started.
I'm so glad you did. So you introduce us to a woman named Sandy Zimmer. She's a young widow who suddenly becomes the publisher of a major city newspaper called The Prospect. Aside from trying to overcome the fact that she would be filling the shoes of her late husband, she's also up against her very domineering father-in-law. Explain that dynamic to our audience.
Well, part of what I was interested in with Sandy, I had previously written a trilogy, the Jane Benjamin novels, where the protagonist was Jane Benjamin. And Sandy was a side figure in those novels, in 2 of them. And I decided to promote Sandy to the protagonist in this role of sort of a newbie publisher upon her husband's death, because Jane is still a very aggressive, uniquely ambitious figure, always getting herself into trouble because she has huge ambitions for someone such as herself, who'd been a tomato picking Okie who cross-dresses to get a job in the newspaper. So I'd had all this time in the head of someone who was uniquely ambitious and aggressive, who sometimes needed to scale back in order to think about people other than herself. So when I switched over to Sandy, it was very intentional, because even though women and ambition in history are kind of like a sub-theme I'm always interested in, what I was interested in here by letting Sandy take the lead was, what is it like for a woman who is not especially ambitious and who in fact has always, the successes she's had have typically flowed from her being conventionally appealing in a feminine way, not only because she's quite beautiful and the right size, unlike Jane, who's unnaturally tall, but also because her way of dealing with the world and progressing in it has been through kind of being a helper. She's got that personality type where she wants to help. And she's been in this pattern of helping very important men. And she does it maybe instinctively. She wants to be the helpmate. And also because it works. For in 1945, it really works. It has elevated her, but I think it comes to
Sure.
her instinctively. So when her husband passes and her father, Wyatt, is now the chairman of the board that runs the newspaper, I think it comes instinctively to her to want to please him. And I also
Right.
think the drive or the desire to be connected in a family way to someone, because her father's passed, her mother had disappeared, her husband is gone. She'd like that feeling of family. She'd like her father-in-law to be someone who is close to her and also approves of her. So even though most of us can relate to that desire to connect with people in our family, in Sandy's case, she's going to have to make adjustments in order to live her life authentically and to do the things that she really needs to do.
She does.
So that, yeah.
What I noticed was, so the rapes that took place in the city and the deaths, along with several deaths during those riots, they were actually underreported by Sandy's competitors.
That's right.
Her board wanted her to do the same. There were others in the city who felt that the rapes needed to be documented, some of that medical profession. Who do you think she relied on mostly for support in that area?
Well, so first of all, I have to admit that there's a lot of wish fulfillment going on because Sandy Zimmer is fictional.
Right.
And the Prospect is a fictional newspaper based on the San Francisco Prospect. I wanted to set the whole thing on a foundation of actual factual historical record, but within it to find sort of the caves or the openings where we don't know what happened and to insert the fiction in there. So it is true factually that there were people trying to report on it. It just never got as big as it should have been. And I was, the wish fulfillment part is Sandy as publisher of the Prospect pushing to report on it beyond what is accepted. But part of the reason it doesn't get reported on, even though there are good faith journalists out there, is that the legal world is tamping it down too, so that when the grand jury determines that no one need be investigated further about the things that happened then, that kind of makes it a lot more difficult in reality and also in this piece of fiction for that story to go anywhere. Well, but you asked who helps. There definitely are reporters who are kind of on her team and in support of her in other ways. Like there are multiple newspapers represented in this novel.
Right.
And they're reflecting the variety of the kinds of newspapers that would have been at work, on that date. And so they have a different angle on what to report on, whether it's appropriate to use the word rape on the front page, for instance.
Right. Well, that leads me to that question I was going to ask you, because eventually she comes up with a plan to win over the other newspapers. What did she say to them to convince them to do the right thing? How did that finally come about?
In my mind, Sandy understood that though every newspaper was very different, there was basically a commerce kind of newspaper that was all about businessmen's interests. There was like the staid old newspaper. There was the tattler, the gossip rag. And then the Prospect was kind of like a scrappy newspaper that was trying to reinvent itself through reporting something actually happening, even when it might get you in trouble. So what she did was she realized that every single one of those publishers, though different, though they come at the news and their job of sharing the news from a different angle, like with a different purpose, they do have in common that, yes, they're newspapers and their core job is to report what's happening. So she said, we have all of that in common.
Right.
We may be different. We are different in terms of our angles. And what she did was propose to them, why don't we share information when we can, like each of us take the angle that is appropriate for our newspaper. And when we find information that's more appropriate for the other papers, we're not going to use it. Share that. And I don't know if that would have happened then, but it struck me that it was a strategic move, that perhaps a woman is more likely to move than a man would be.
I think you're right. And the other woman surprising in the book was her mother-in-law.
Yes.
She surprised Sandy in a way that she wasn't expecting. And yet I wasn't sure she was going to until the very end. How did you put that into it? Where did that come in? How did that play in?
Well, I always think about, when I'm choosing who will be taking on active roles in a story, one of the things I really care about is that I kind of spread out human responses to a thing. Like if I think about it as being like a daisy shaped, and in the middle of the daisy is a question that needs answering. For instance, should we actively report on this is one of the questions she deals with. And every character that gets a lot of time on the page is a different petal on that daisy, and they might answer that question differently. Even if they agree on the answer, yes or no, the reasons for it would be different. So it was important to me to show, though Sandy has Jane as her kind of sidekick, who's very aggressive and an unusual woman in that time, I really wanted someone like Olive, her mother-in-law, who was, harkens back to an earlier time, and who wasn't, if Sandy's the helper, Olive is more like someone who just wants to keep the peace, particularly with her husband. She doesn't want to upset things. That has always been the habit. But that doesn't mean, I think all of us have instincts that are maybe come with us at birth, or we learn them early, but that doesn't mean that's all we're capable of. We all have DNA, and our DNA may lead us to certain things, but that doesn't mean that certain cells and proclivities can't express themselves, surprising us. And so in terms of Olive, she was never going to be the leader of the band. She does not like to make trouble. She does not like to upset her husband. But that doesn't mean she's not moral, and she is moral. It just takes her a while to get to a solution where she can be of help to Sandy and to this cause without also losing the man that she has loved all of her adult life.
Right, and she does just that. Excuse me. So I think that following this, I was never sure whether, and I think there were times when she was very unsure whether she was on the right path, whether she'd get the support. But as you follow the different twists and turns, I think it's a very, it just says everything about what was going on there. I think it's very good. So if our audience wants to read more about it, you can go over to, on Facebook, we have something called Novels and Latte, and you hook onto that, and you might even actually win a free copy of Shelley's book. Now, tell me about, as a historical novel, most often those are written by people who call themselves plotters, not necessarily pantsters. However, I've discovered in interviewing several authors that that it's sort of a little of each in this case. I don't know if you found that. Did you find, you have to have an outline, obviously, because you have a real historical piece. But does your character suddenly take you in directions that you hadn't thought of?
That is a great question. And it's true that because I really wanted it to be pegged to real events, particularly in the time of the section of the novel that deals with what happened on the streets that over that time period, as well as what happened in the hospital, I really hugged very closely to what I could find in the newspapers. And it wasn't so much what I found in the 1945 newspapers. It was that San Francisco Chronicle did a retrospective reporting on it 10 years ago, and they were able to turn up some things. So there I was very, you mentioned pantsers versus plotters, very much plotted Sandy's experiences on the streets, witnessing what was happening, against what happened at certain locations on the street. So that was very plotted. And I knew an overarching plot. And that's important to me, to know where do I want this to go. So I make sure I kind of point my boat in that direction. But outside of that, things can just happen. So sometimes people surprise me, and I love to go with that. I think my best example of that actually wasn't from this book. It was from an earlier book called Tomboy, featuring Jane Benjamin. And I only bring it up because it's an example of her acting out, doing what I don't want her to do. There's a scene where Jane sleeps with someone on the Queen Mary that she absolutely should not be sleeping with. It's such a terrible decision. So I'm like, okay, she does it. And I'm like, okay, I see how this happens, in this drunken night in the bar on the Queen Mary. So that happens, and the scene is, limited. But when he gets up and takes a shower, all of a sudden I'm writing that Jane gets up, she opens his top drawer, she checks in his pants pockets, takes money out of his pants pockets, and takes keys. And I literally stopped typing and I said, Jane, what are you doing? That is a terrible idea. So that was one of the few spots for me where the character really took over. And, I was like accessing what I felt Jane would do, not what I needed her to do for this story. And that was a delightful feeling. And I kind of think I'm naturally a plotter, because even though I spent most of my life thinking, I'm really an instinctive or intuitive person, I don't think I am. I'm logical. I've really discovered in the process of writing these 4 books, I'm a logical person. So I build logical steps of what I intend to do. And then within the safety of those, things happen that surprise me. So I get that sort of pantsing experience, which I adore, but it's within an arc that
it's safe. It's a safe place. Yeah,
it is.
I have found more and more women who are saying that this is happening within a safe place. And then it is surprising. It's always surprising. Now, you did that historical mystery series before this book, and it follows the Jane Benjamin, and she's cross-dressing, she's tomato picking. Tell me, so one was Copy Boy, one was Tomboy. Tell me a little bit about that series.
That series came about actually through family stories. Copy Boy is set in 1937 California, and it has to do with Jane Benjamin is kind of an unruly, kind of unlikable girl whose family picks tomatoes alongside the river in Sacramento. And she winds up getting in a fight with her father in defense of her mother, and believes she's committed a crime and escapes that irrigation fronting tent for San Francisco, where she tries to get a job. And it's the Great Depression, so she can't get a job walking in the door as she is. She disguises herself as a boy, gets on as a copy boy at the San Francisco Prospect. And so it's both that she's a copy boy and that she's taking on a male identity in order to get that work, and kind of discovers how to apply her nerviness and bravery by taking on that identity. And so how it got really started was that my parents on both sides were Okies who migrated to California during the Dust Bowl, and with differences. My dad came from a family of 10 kids, and they did sleep in a tent by the side of the road. They did, in their case, I gave them tomatoes because they were in Sacramento, but in my family's case, it was potatoes and cotton. The kids all picked potatoes or cotton before school. They all picked potatoes and cotton after school.
Wow.
Went home to a tent. And so I had so many family stories that really turned on that. And part of it was that my father passed away 1 year ago, and he laughed one time and he goes, so, because the opening scene, Jane tries to kill, she didn't try to kill, she tries to fight her father, daddy. And my dad says, oh, so you want to kill me? Is that it? And I go, Dad, you're not daddy. You're Jane. You're the aggressive, ambitious one. And so I was really inspired a lot by his growing up in this situation, his whole family getting looked down on so much, and yet his being terrifically ambitious. He got his EDD, he was a superintendent of schools. He, founded with my brother an internet company. He accomplished so much because he had outsized ambition, and at least partly because of, he would always say, because of the grit he developed through his early beginnings in difficult times. And so Jane really, really tapped into what I thought of my father that way.
And then you went on to write something called Poster Girl?
That's right. And in Poster Girl, Jane has gotten herself, well, it went Copyboy then Tomboy, and Tomboy has Jane stowing away on the Queen Mary to get to England for Wimbledon, because there's a San Franciscan, based on a real life San Franciscan, Alice Marble, who played in the 1939 Wimbledon. She was the world champion right before World War II. And so Jane is stowing away to get there because she really wants to get herself off the copy bench, then off the reporter list, to become the gossip columnist for the newspaper. And so it's a story about a murder that takes place in that setting. And then Poster Girl is set in 1942, and Jane is now a gossip columnist. And it's set in the Richmond, California shipyards, where they were building the Liberty ships. And Jane goes there as part of like a puff situation, almost a propaganda thing, in support of not Wendy the Welders, but not Rosie the Riveters, but Wendy the Welders on that site. So she goes there for propaganda and gossip kind of purposes, and winds up landing on a mystery that she has to solve. So it's always been really fun for me to take a particular year in a particular time, or usually it's more like a week or a month in a particular year and space. What was going on there, and how can I let my character experience that and uncover things that other people may not know about it?
Yeah, well, you've done a really good job. So what are you working on now?
I'm working on, well, I have told myself that An Unlikely Prospect launched in August, and it was a very, very busy launch, and there was lots of family stuff happening too. So I told myself, wait until January. Don't start literally working on the next one until January. And of course, I can't stop, and I can't stop reading about it and talking about it and brainstorming. But this next one is, I'm beginning to explore, and don't know exactly where it'll go yet, but I'm exploring Earl Warren, the former Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, and California governor. He grew up where I grew up in Bakersfield, California. And I'd always thought, it's so interesting that such an pivotal person is so little celebrated in my hometown. And I do think it's because his Supreme Court was antithetical to what a lot of people in Bakersfield liked. And so in Sacramento, where I live now, I've always been a little surprised that he's not celebrated or put at the center of things. And I think it may be because of his role in Japanese internment. So I've always felt like there's, on the one hand, he was a law and order DA, and then there's a development through his, early career all the way to the Supreme Court. And the thing that I discovered that got me going on this research is that Earl Warren's father was murdered in Bakersfield, and the murder was never solved. And Earl Warren sent his private detective that he used in Alameda as DA to Bakersfield to support the police officers. And the detective turned up someone he thought had committed the crime and told the police department, please don't call him in yet. We're not ready. We need to get more information. But the police department did call him in, and in fact, gave him the 3rd degree. Listen, I haven't been down there to read the files yet, so I can't say exactly what happened.
Right.
This is what's generally reported. But they gave him the 3rd degree. He was able to pull in lawyers and to get out of it. And then Warren's father's murder was never solved. And so as a result of that, so I'm starting to do the research in January of whether there appears to be some kind of through line from the experience of his father being murdered, the crime never being solved, and it being related to police officers doing what they should not have done.
Yeah, this could go
line. Yeah. Is this through line all the way through being governor when he let someone off of death row for the same kind of fact pattern, all the way to writing the Miranda rights on the Supreme Court? So that's what I'm investigating.
And it can go anywhere, this one, I can tell.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I don't want to nail it down too soon because this is exploration time.
Sure. And what do you usually find your research takes you?
Well, there's a variety of things. I love books. So I'm always getting, books on the subject. And then I have used librarians quite a bit. When I can't find things myself, I will often reach out to librarians. An example of that from Tomboy would have been, I needed to get Jane from San Francisco to New York in a period of time, like starting with this date and leaving on this date when I knew the Queen Mary would be departing for London. And I had no idea how the train situation would work. So I contacted the director of the California Railroad Museum, and I think his name is Chris Rockwell. And I asked if he had any insights. And he said, well, let me put a couple of volunteers, docents on it for you. And a couple weeks later, I got a 19-page single-spaced document called Let's Get Jane to New York. And they gave me every train that she could conceivably have chosen, what the dates and times would have been. They gave me what kind of fabric is on the upholstery. How much does a ham sandwich cost? If Jane had this ticket, could she go in the dining car? If she had this ticket, would she be sleeping upright or in a
wow?
So it was so amazing. And so I started writing all the stuff they gave me because I loved it so much. And when my editor read it, she goes, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Those guys are fantastic. You must be so pleased. We know you can't use it all, right? Because the research was so gratifying, but it just stopped the story. So I had to comb through and get rid of so much detail that stopped the reader from moving forward, leaving just, the select details that really revealed something about her personality and the trip she was on.
Sometimes that we don't know where we're going to get our information. And I have also found librarians are extremely helpful. I wrote a book about the coal mine slide over in Wales, and I was over there doing my research and was at the university and was working with a librarian there, and she would come in every day, and give me the new pencils. You had to have the gloves on, the whole thing. And one day she came in to me and she said, Carole, would you like to speak to the man who told them that slide was going to fall and they wouldn't believe him? And I said, twist my arm. And
my gosh.
She says, he's sitting out here in the library and I want to bring him in to meet with you. He was 86 years old, and he told me exactly what happened. And he was still tearful because they didn't believe him. And his nephew was killed in the slide. And so you just never know. But I have found these librarians are so helpful, and they just,
Oh my gosh.
aren't they? Aren't they?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a magic. It's like, I don't know if people fully understand the degree to which they jump in to help. Like with this most recent book, one of the things I really wanted was the DA in San Francisco at the time was Pat Brown, our former California governor before his son Jerry Brown was governor. Pat Brown was the DA in San Francisco, and he convened a grand jury immediately on the end of the riot, and then finished up work 2 weeks later. And the grand jury found nobody was to blame. Nothing really happened. That's all. That's all there is, folks. And in fact, several people were to be commended. So what I really wanted was to see the grand jury reports. So I worked through the San Francisco Public Library, the San Francisco History Center.
Yeah.
I went to, let's see, the Whitkin State Law Library, the UC Berkeley and Bancroft libraries, the Clerk of the Court in San Francisco, and everybody got really into it. And it was discovered that there were grand jury files for 1937, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 46, 47. No records available for the 1 year that when I wanted them. And so at first, all the librarians who were communicating with me were disconsolate about it, as I was like, how can I write this book now? And then I sort of thought, dummy, you're a historical fiction writer. This is your invitation. You found that there's this little cave, an absence of information. So that is the place for you to play, to try to figure out why this happened. Events unfurled the way that they did, but always librarians are a key to it. And I'm really looking forward to on the Earl Warren research. We'll see if it becomes a book, but the apparently the Cal State Bakersfield Library has access to all the police records from that time. So in January, I'll be going down, spend some time, because as you say, there's so much you can do remotely now. It's great for historical writers. However, there is something about being in the room with someone and them feeling that you are someone they can trust, and the possibility of learning more because you're there.
It's just amazing. Well, I really enjoyed this interview, and I'm looking forward to seeing whether this becomes a book. Is there any way that our audience can get in touch with you? Do you have a website that you want to share?
Yes, it's www, and it's my name, ShelleyBlanton-Stroud.com, but there's no hyphen in the website. So you can see my name on the screen and use that to do the search, and you'll find my website, which will have links to. I do a every other week Substack essay that you could sign up for if you're interested, but you'll always see updates to what's going on book-wise there too.
That's great. Well, listen, I wish you lots of luck, and I look forward to that next book. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And for the rest of you, please join us again when we I'll introduce you to our next episode of Online for Authors. I'm Carole O'Neill.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.